thank you all for joining. As Ron mentioned, my name is Jim Steinbacher. I am the technical evangelist for wireless here at WatchGuard Technologies. If you're not familiar with WatchGuard, WatchGuard is a security company, and our focus is on both wired and wireless security. And this presentation covers a bunch of stuff, and I could spend hours literally on each one of these particular topics. But I'm going to give you the overview of what's going on with Wi-Fi 6. We're going to talk a little bit about the challenges with remote access and how to secure that. Touch on E-rate funding, and then if there's any time, we'll get some questions. So here's the good news. Wi-Fi 6 and Wi-Fi 6E fixes everything that's broken with Wi-Fi. Probably not. But there are some notable improvements that we will see with Wi-Fi 6. And Wi-Fi 6 is the next logical generation of Wi-Fi technology that has evolved since the first Wi-Fi spec was introduced in '99. And as we've moved forward, the capabilities that Wi-Fi offers have improved. But perhaps more importantly, our reliance on Wi-Fi networks has become more and more critical to just our day-to-day operational side of our lives, whether it's at home, at work, in the office, working remotely, going to the coffee shop and hooking up. We all are becoming more and more dependent on Wi-Fi. And the technology, as it has become more available, has also opened up a few vulnerabilities that most folks may not be aware exist. But for the improvements that we're talking about, right, there's really the potential for much higher density deployments. What do I mean by that? Well, every person out there probably has, that's listening to this, has at least two devices, wireless devices, that they deal with on an every day-to-day basis. It's probably a laptop, it's probably your phone. There might be others. In fact, a couple of years ago, there was a statistic that the average college student went to school with 7 wireless devices. So each one of these clients has a demand to get onto the network. And what's important is, how can we design networks that are capable of not just allowing these devices on, but are actually going to provide them with a near wire speed capability. Once we do that, then we can look at how do we deploy in those larger, denser environments, schools, from a private life, a stadium, for example. How are these technologies going to help us be able to deploy Wi-Fi into those environments? So Wi-Fi 6 and Wi-Fi 6E are the next step to be able to do that. There are some security enhancements. That's the good news. WPA3, you may have heard that technology. That's the next generation. We've been using WPA2 pre-shared key and WPA2 enterprise for about the last 8 years. And now the new generation of technology for security has come out, and it's WPA3. And new devices that you purchase today are all going to come equipped with WPA3. There's going to be reduced interference. Today, we see an unruly group of wireless broadcasters competing with one another and effectively creating a great deal of noise in the wireless spectrum. And that impacts how well it operates, what your perception of how well the Wi-Fi is operating on. By reducing interference, which Wi-Fi 6 and Wi-Fi 6E are set to do, everyone's performance is going to be vastly improved. And with that performance, we're going to get higher throughput. And so everyone's always looking at faster, faster, faster. Wi-Fi 6 and Wi-Fi 6E are going to offer an opportunity to get us there. And with Wi-Fi 6E, we actually can start talking about bigger channels. Manufacturers have a tendency to shine the light on the great things about their product and about the specs. And one of the things that oftentimes is listed is the number of concurrent clients and how fast the speed is. And most people get disappointed when they deploy a Wi-Fi network, whether it's at home or at the office or at school, and they discover that it's much, much slower. Well, part of the reason for that is the size of the channel that needs to be available to be able to put more data out there in the air. And Wi-Fi 6E is the 6 gigahertz version of Wi-Fi 6. And the FCC just announced in April that they've opened up 1.2 gigahertz worth of additional spectrum. When we talk about Wi-Fi in 5 gigahertz or in 2.4 gigahertz, this is going to be Wi-Fi in 6 gigahertz. And the FCC's focus was on trying to broaden that opportunity for folks to utilize Wi-Fi in new ways. And with this additional spectrum, we have an opportunity to get larger channels. And with those larger channels, we actually get higher throughput. So that's the good news about the enhancements to Wi-Fi 6. However, there's always a but, and this is part of the but. To take advantage of most of these new technologies, you need new hardware. You've got to have Wi-Fi 6 capable client devices, whether it's a phone or whether it's a tablet or whether it's a laptop. They all have to be capable of Wi-Fi 6. And in fact, to take advantage of 6 gigahertz, they've got to be built for that additional spectrum. And that will typically mean higher costs. And until you actually get more than half of your network capable of running the new standard, you're just kind of spending money that you don't need to quite yet. I know that sounds strange coming from a manufacturer, but it's true. The other thing is higher power requirements. So when you're adding these additional radios, now all of a sudden the access points themselves need more raw power coming out of the outlet in the wall to be able to power up all and broadcast with all of those radios. Well, most access points today are driven by power over Ethernet. And what that means is that we might have to go through another switch upgrade just to be able to power these newer access points that are running Wi-Fi 6. And security, even though there are improvements with WPA3, there are still huge holes to the new standard that aren't being addressed. And moreover, all of those existing clients that are in our pockets today are going to remain vulnerable to security threats as long as we own them and as long as they're on networks. And if we really want to reduce the interference that we're seeing in our networks, we have to do better planning. We could have planned better with 802.11n, the last standard, and our networks would have performed better. Oftentimes, we're looking at the technology to solve the problem when really it's the planning side. And by planning, I mean simulations of deployment strategies for Wi-Fi, where to put an access point, what power to broadcast it on, what channel to broadcast it on, how many people are in one area of a building versus another area. And that planning can help ensure the overall performance of the Wi-Fi network. And without it, which is oftentimes what happens today, we get the end result of Wi-Fi that's And Wi-Fi always gets the blame. Something's running slow and it's got to be the Wi-Fi's fault. And that's not always the case, but there are still plenty of opportunities for it to be the case. And so the truth of it is 802.11ac based networks, those are the access points, the technology that's commoditized today, are going to be the most cost-effective networks to deploy for the next couple of years. Why do I say that? Well, look at your devices that you're looking at right now, whether it's your laptop or your phone or your kids' phones. How many of those are more than a year old, or more than 2 years old, or more than 3 years old? What we've seen is that with COVID and the switch to working remotely, devices are being held onto longer. So if we go back to that original premise where we said you have to upgrade to get the newest security enhancements, but we're keeping our devices longer, that translates into issues. And those security issues are the single most overlooked Wi-Fi network planning and management aspect. People don't talk about security. They talk about how fast it is and how great it works and what your throughput could be. But when you start talking about security, most folks start to quiet down and they're not quite so enthusiastic. And part of that has to do with the core technology and Wi-Fi itself that has been vulnerable to attacks since the invention of Wi-Fi, literally. And that lack of security has real world consequences. So this came out in September of this year. Inspector General for the Department of Interior did an internal audit on the Wi-Fi network that was running in this federal department. And they hired some penetration testers to come and see how vulnerable they were. Well, they ended this evaluation 3 weeks early and shut down the entire Wi-Fi network for the Department of Interior because there were so many security holes in it that it made the entire network vulnerable. And we just caught wind today in the news of Russian hackers, for example, targeting other governmental businesses. But this doesn't just happen to governments. It happens to us all. This little backpack over here, and the equipment there is a Raspberry Pi, there's a little broadcasting device, etc. All of that equipment there, with a battery included, costs less than $100, $150. And throw it in a backpack, you can't see it, you're walking around, you're collecting data, and that's how hackers actually gain access to the network. It's through our own insecurity. So how easy is it to really attack Wi-Fi? Well, if you go out to YouTube and search on Wi-Fi hacking, guess what? You'll find more than 3.5 million videos on how to do it. If it wasn't so popular, there wouldn't be so many videos out there on how to do it. There are free tools that are available. Kali Linux is a Linux distribution that is optimized for penetration testing. Well, if you're wearing a white hat, penetration testing is I'm looking for the holes that you might have. If you're wearing a black hat, I'm doing the same thing, but my intent is different. There are tools that are available for a variety of platforms: tablets, phones, laptops, Mac OS, Windows 10, Linux. These tools are readily available, and the vast majority are free. And finally, there are dedicated tools as well, where you can go out and buy these penetration testing tools for not too much money. There's one common Wi-Fi pineapple that's available for less than $100. That runs on a battery, and with a large enough battery, it can run for well over a week, collecting data the entire time. So those are the tools that make it easy. How does it work? how does a hacker actually hack a Wi-Fi or hack your network? Well, they're going to use one of those devices to listen to what are called client probe requests. Your phone, your laptop, sends out a probe to see what networks are in the area. We've all seen it happen. We've seen, searching for networks. When we're already connected to a network, that's your device sending out a probe request. Who's out there? Who's out there? Well, if I'm the bad guy, it turns out I can listen to those probe requests, and within them, they include an SSID of a network you've connected to in the past. It might be your home network, it might be your work network. And so it's like standing out with a megaphone and yelling, home network, are you here? Work network, are you here? The bad guy listens to that, knows what your network is, and then turns around and rebroadcasts one of those SSIDs with open authentication. So you might have a password on your network at home, but your phone sees your network over here. It didn't bother to ask it for a password, so it just automatically connects. The default behavior of phones today in particular is if there's a strong Wi-Fi signal, turn the Wi-Fi on and then connect to the known network. You've got to go into your phone and change those settings, but most people don't do that. So when your client, your phone, auto joins the network, that's it. You've effectively been hacked. More to the point, how do you really know what access point your device is connecting to? You think, oh, I'm connecting to my home right here. There's my home router, I've connected up. But that guy that's running the evil twin, that's broadcasting your home SSID, he might be kicking your clients off of your own home device and having them automatically attached to him. And then through him, he's giving you access to the internet. You've been hacked. Does that mean you're going to lose all of your information, or that your network suddenly is super vulnerable? No, but it's only really a matter of time until it is. And it doesn't take much effort once you have started collecting that data to start looking at techniques to break through passwords, etc. So this is a quick graph of a table of the calculated times it takes to, with a dedicated cracking machine running software, to calculate what your password might be based on the length of it is. And these times are getting smaller and smaller every day. So you might think, I've got 12 characters, great. It's going to take them 200 years to try and crack my password. And if they were doing a brute force attack alone, that's exactly what it would take. Except they're not. I went out to the web and I literally typed in dictionary attack lists. And here's a short group of examples of pre-compiled password lists. These are passwords that have come off of the web through breaches. There are guys that have literally entered all the words in the dictionary and looked at what the hashed password is and then stored those in a table. So all of these tables then make searching for the pattern of your encrypted password much, much easier. And so the guy that's hacking isn't listening this minute and is turning around and necessarily attacking the device that you've connected with. Rather, they're just collecting the data, going back to their lair, sitting down and doing the analyzation of that information to literally attack your network. So why do I bring this up? Well, we're all effectively working remote today. Whether it's remote learning in school, whether it's remote working from your office, COVID has changed the dynamic of how we use Wi-Fi and where we're using it on a daily basis. And that creates new vulnerabilities. So here's some things that you could do about it. If you're not running an always-on VPN on your phone, shame on you. It is time to get one. Now, you've got to trust the endpoint that your VPN is connecting to, but what a VPN will effectively do is that guy that's been listening to your connection, all the traffic that's going through your phone and is going through his device now, that's all now encrypted with a VPN. And he's not going to be able to look at that data and utilize it against you. You can think about this as kind of a branch office strategy. If as a company or even as a school district, we were able to send home an access point or some device that our users could plug into the network, their home network or their remote network, that would automatically connect back to the central location that we ultimately want them to be connected to and encrypt the data along the way, we would have a far simpler and far safer remote learning and remote activity experience for all of us. The kids are going to go back to school here at some point, and the security risks that we're talking about here, they're still going to exist when the students return to the classroom. Now, there are pros and cons of putting a VPN on your kid's phone. One of the pros is their connections are going to be safe. One of the cons is a lot of times in those scholastic environments, they're blocking VPN connections so that the student can't bypass filtering that might be taking place there within the school. These are some strategies that need to be well thought through to make certain that both those end users, those clients, and the networks that they are attaching to remain safe and aren't impacted by poor performance. Now remember that what we talked about at the beginning, that the Wi-Fi 6 offers an opportunity to see an increase in throughput, etc. That's all very true. But we're dealing with legacy devices in many folks' pockets. And we've got to come up with the strategies that are going to help them remain safe, not just when they're in the classroom, but when they're outside the classroom or in the office, as well as outside of the office. So talking about security needs to be the first thing you talk about when you talk about implementing a new network, a wireless network. What am I going to use for security? How am I going to protect it? What are the client devices going to look like? How am I going to protect those? What's the impact on throughput going to be when I do that? Do I have sufficient Wi-Fi coverage? How will I know that? I'll know it because I've done some planning at the outset and done a predictive study that says, oh yes, this is how many access points I need for the throughput that I require in these areas. And then we turn that around, and once that network gets implemented, we go back and make certain that the performance is to the level that we expect. Because we don't want those complaints, oh, it's the Wi-Fi problem. And that as soon as you start blaming the Wi-Fi, you're looking for ways to get around it. And Wi-Fi can be and should be a very effective tool, but if we don't put security first, we're literally asking for trouble down the road. I mentioned I'm going to talk a little bit about E-rate just to keep everyone abreast of what's going on. So wireless solutions, including Wi-Fi security overlays, are all Category 2 purchases. So if you're familiar with E-rate, you already know what a category 2 is. I'm not an E-rate expert, but there are experts at WatchGuard that can certainly answer any questions that you might have on E-rate with respect to wireless. The per student budgeting cap has increased to $167 per student for 2021. For third-party managed networks, in other words, you implement a cloud-based wireless network, for example, or firewall solution, and you have a third-party partner that is managing that for your company or your agency or your school. There's a $32 per student budget for that over a 5-year time span. Cloud managed subscriptions are all category 2 as well. And I encourage you to avoid the bright, shiny object. It's tempting for us to throw new technology at a problem in the hopes of fixing it. But if we don't understand from the beginning what the real issues are with the technology that we've deployed, it's throwing good money after bad to buy a new system and hope that that's going to fix all of our problems. So the things I can tell you that are going to be most effective in terms of your spending your time and the dollars. They are, look at what your actual requirements are for throughput in the areas that you're trying to light up with Wi-Fi. Do the planning.
If you could unmute yourself, you can see the screen.
Am I muted?
Yep. Hey, how you doing there, Jim? Just if you could start finishing up, okay?
Yep, you got it. So anyway, I'm practically wrapped up. All I'm looking for right now is for each of you to consider, look at your security, look at the security you've implemented today, look at what your requirements are going to be tomorrow, and incorporate that as a key part of your planning up front. Ask the hard questions of the vendors and expect to get solid answers.